And welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome back Jessie Mahoney, pediatrician and certified coach. Today's Kevin MD article is From Burnout to Balance, a neurosurgeon's bold career redesign. Jessie, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So what's this latest article about?
So this article is really about moving beyond this feeling of sort of failure and shame when the traditional systems don't work. And especially for women who I think really see the option as if the traditional system doesn't work, they have to leave medicine and that they failed if that traditional system and conforming to signing up for a job or working in a specific place that doesn't work for you, it's a failure and you haven't made medicine work. It's a you problem.
All right. So in your article, you talk about a neurosurgeon who wanted to become an interior designer. So tell us about that story.
And that story it blew my mind. So this neurosurgeon came to a women physician retreat that I run. I run them many times a year. And she came actually having redesigned her job, left a job that wasn't working for her and redesigned to a job that was working for her life, but still was considering leaving altogether and literally becoming an interior designer. She loved interior design. She was super good at it, was her passion. And it really felt like that was the only path forward. And if you look now, a year and a bit later, still doing that same job and actually loving medicine and happy that she's there and really figuring out how to move beyond. And it wasn't just that logistical piece of making the change, because she had actually already made that change. It was really more of the internal shift of saying, it's actually okay to practice medicine in unique and different ways, and we can bring tremendous good to the world. And in fact, not funny because it sounds judgy, but not judgmental, but like to very underserved areas and places that really need physicians when we think outside the box, as when we can move beyond this blame and shame about not conforming to the system. And I know that I worked through that myself, and I work with so many people who we feel like, well, if this where I am doesn't work, it's a me problem, and therefore maybe I have to leave medicine. And to recognize that when we can look beyond that and be curious and start to recognize the system needs to have room for lots of different ways of practicing, and especially for medicine. Medicine wasn't really built with women in mind.
Yeah.
It wasn't built with people who are having children in mind. It wasn't really built with two partners working full time in mind. It wasn't built for women who are neurosurgeons for sure. And even, ORs aren't built for women, and our residency training isn't built for women. So we get to this point where we've just tried to conform and become a chameleon for so long that even when we maybe are brave enough to make the shift, we still sit in this idea of, well, maybe I have to leave because maybe this isn't an acceptable way to be in medicine when we're actually making a huge difference. And so I would really like for people to see that we can make a big difference practicing outside the box and that there's hope.
So when you talk to that neurosurgeon who harbored that
Yeah.
feel that those
Yeah.
thoughts to think outside the box, so tell us a story about in terms of what happened next, and were you able to coach her, or was this more of a group retreat? So tell us the next steps.
Well, I think two things. So it started with the group retreat where the words were literally, well, I'm thinking I might just leave and become an interior designer. And so part of it is the connection with other physicians who are supporting you and seeing this path and all that you've done to try to make it work. And I think very often when we can be in a space where other people see better than we do the contribution that we're making. So she'd already made a shift to working sort of not actually at locums, but working in another state and just flying back and forth, which I actually see a lot of physicians doing now. And then it's partly that acceptance of others, and then working on all of these things that we were taught, as women and children and in our training about forging your own path and whether that's okay to do. When we go into medicine, we are pretty much people pleasers, right? We want people to like us. And I think particularly for women during our training, we spend so much time trying to fit the mold that we've almost forgotten who we are. And so then it's hard to build back that internal sense of self and strength and authenticity.
So I've been doing this podcast for 4 to 5 years now. Of course, I've been on Kevin MD for 20 plus years. And one of the themes that I try to promote is that physicians are more than the degrees and to think outside the box. And the narrow definition of what a doctor should be should no longer be the case. Now, over the years that you've been coaching and counseling, have you seen that mold of a physician? Have you seen that mold become less rigid over the years?
I would say that probably in the last year, it's become a lot less rigid. So there's been a movement over the last couple years. Is it okay to add in lifestyle medicine? Is it okay to do this? And so these little pivots where people are willing to start shifting. But this idea that you can truly practice in a very unique and different way, where you can have an extremely fulfilling career where you fly to another state and work for a week and then you're home for a week. And like the
Yeah.
fact that you can do that and we don't consider that less than, and in fact, it could be considered more than, is really powerful. And I see a lot of people who have made changes. Other physicians are reaching out now and saying, like,
Yeah.
how did you do that? How do I do that? I didn't know that it was possible. And I think when we actually move beyond this sort of one way is better than the other, we really have opened almost Pandora's box.
Yeah.
And I don't see it as, everyone is leaving medicine. I think we're recreating, redesigning a medicine that's actually more human focused for those who are practicing medicine and ultimately will lead to more people staying in medicine and providing great care. So I see so many really creative ways to practice outside the box, whether it's having your own sort of private DPC practice or even within hospital medicine. I think that the outpatient came first, and so people sort of recognizing they could do a concierge or they could do private pay or they could, some people have a more concierge practice and they have a bit of a dilemma because they also want to provide care to the underserved,
Sure.
but they can also volunteer or they can do mission trips. Like there's so many different ways to piece it together. That was sort of the first break in the dam. And
Mhm.
then the second piece is really people being willing to do hospital work in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think, I think particularly for women, it's been harder because they've tried to fit into this mold for so long. And one of the things that's really cool is once you start to do this, you start to meet lots of other people that do this. And
Yeah.
then it becomes clear that, like, wow, this is actually a way that we can do medicine that works in a much healthier way for everyone. Reminds me of other specialties where people are really, pilots work these shifts and then
Yeah.
they're off for this amount of time, but it is more regimented in the way that we can have pauses and breaks. And our other systems of practicing medicine aren't built that way.
Now, we've mentioned about those physicians who are listening to you in this podcast and say, why can't I do that? But do you also hear from those who cling on to the traditional models of medicine who are resistant to this change? What kind of pushback have you heard from these? I'm going to call them traditionalists.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of pushback. One, physicians don't like change, right? We're threatened by change. And we were kind of raised in a culture where if we do it all the same way, then it works.
Yeah.
And I
Even
think
if that change benefits them.
even if change benefits them. But I think the other thing is when someone goes out and does something, it threatens what everyone else has clung to for so long. And so and this isn't a personal thing, it's really that most physicians are depleted and have overgiven. And so to see someone out here doing something different, it's sort of like, well, wait a minute. I sacrificed all this and I am doing it this way. This is the way we've always done it. And I think we use the way we've always done it as like the right way.
Yeah.
And I heard from someone that this idea of shame, when there isn't really a good reason, we make people feel shame.
Hmm.
The culture is shame. And so I think that that's like, well, I've been doing this. This is the way it's done. And I don't think it's done mean-spirited. I think it's just what people know. And if we don't know any different, we can't know. And I've mentioned this before, but that we're practicing medicine in a way that was designed for a different kind of medicine. And so it's imperative that we begin to adapt and change and that we be brave enough and courageous enough to do that. But I think it's very isolating. It's isolating for those who choose to stay. and isolating for those
Yeah.
who choose to do something different. And honestly, I'm not sure that one is better than the other. I think that a traditional model can work really well for some people. They actually want to be in that model and they don't want to be out there doing things in a different way. But can we in medicine make room for all of it? There's so many people needing care that, of course, we can and should, but is our system going to be willing to offer that? I hope so.
And it's not just physicians who, or some physicians that cling to the traditional model. It's, of course, the administrators as well,
Yes.
who generally are going to push back against the flexibility that we're talking about today. So tell us about some of the arguments that we can make to convince these administrators that sometimes thinking outside the box can keep physicians happy and happy physicians tend to stay. So what are some arguments that we can make to these skeptical administrators?
Well, I would say one, primarily the retention issue. They
Yep.
need doctors. And if you want doctors to stay, you have to find a way to make medicine palatable and doable and reasonable in a healthy way. But I also think that, administrators like the old system because it works for them.
Yeah.
It's worked for a while, but it's actually breaking for them as well. And so to me, it's if you want to be able to continue to have a sustainable system, you need to actually allow this because doctors are brilliant, smart, creative, determined people. And once we can see beyond this idea that we have to do it this way, they're all going to be able to go and do this. So I think that administrators who aren't willing to hear it are going to get left behind. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of medical spaces. So I think trying hard to figure out, how we can create options and flexibility. I think if you see a few people do things outside the box and stay, and then actually they bring more and more and more to organizations that's the value. And I think it's tricky to convince people because they don't want to change. But
Yeah.
we also know that we're almost to the point that if you don't change, things will break. I remember in my old organization, we were actually encouraged to change by this idea that we didn't want to become Blockbuster or Kodak. And I remember thinking like, oh, well, that's a little bit of a scarcity mindset. And now I'm thinking like, well, it actually is also the same. We can sort of put that back on them that if the systems don't want to become that. So that was used to get us to do emails, right? If we didn't do emails, we would be sort of totally old, like the paper film that we used to have in the dark rooms. And so this is kind of the same idea that we can't keep practicing the way that we've always practiced because medicine is different. I think, though, if as physicians we don't acknowledge that and we don't support one another and we don't have each other's back, then it isn't going to work either. And so it's really this thinking outside the box of all of us and recognizing that there's that quote that doing the same thing and expecting a different results is insanity. And so I do think that that's probably the most helpful way to speak to the administrators. It also reminds me of the idea of just speaking the same language, like how will it benefit them? And of course, it's going to take creativity and change, but if we don't adapt and keep up, I don't know how we can make things work in the future. We know that when we haven't, things are falling apart.
Now, for those physicians who are listening to you and may feel stuck in their job for any number of reasons, whether it's the traditional mindset or whether it's overwhelming loans that they have to pay back, what's the first step that you would recommend to think outside the box and redefine what success should be as a physician?
Yeah, I think the first step is really to not catastrophize because I think most people think that they can't change because it won't work
Hmm.
and they can't change because they might fail. And I would say, well, you might not fail. And I think many people are like, well, I can't take that risk because of X, Y, or Z. And my thought might be, you might find something that allows you to pay off your loans a lot faster, for example. But we are really caught in this, I can't take a risk. And
Yeah.
so really you're worth the risk and your career is worth the risk. I think the question that has really helped me and many people is thinking ahead to some future self, whether it's your 40-year self or your 60-year self, what will they wish you had done
Hmm.
now? Because rarely will they wish you had stayed somewhere where you feel stuck. The other thing is that I love this vision of a car stuck in the mud, you don't accelerate and shoot out, right? You rock back and forth. You have to start nudging yourself loose, and it takes time.
Mhm.
And, as physicians, we want to check box and to figure out the answer, but you don't know how you're going to get out of the mud until you start wiggling and thinking. And then I think the other thing that allows us to think more flexibly is back to mindfulness and a healthy nervous system and being replete, because nobody can make big change from just a place of complete depletion and fight or flight, stress, terror, which many of us feel in working in the current system. So whether you need to take a pause, which is very often what people need, and to look out there and see all the other people. So many people are beginning to make change and speak
Mhm.
up for themselves. And the more we speak up for ourselves, there's precedent. And so I think if you don't see it in your smaller setting or people are telling you it can't be done, look farther afield and see how it is being done. I think we often say look for clues.
We're talking to Jessie Mahoney, pediatrician and certified coach. Today's Kevin MD article is From Burnout to Balance, a neurosurgeon's bold career redesign. Jessie, let's have some take-home messages they want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
I think when the system isn't working for you, to recognize that it's not you that's broken, it's our system is not functioning well, and how it wasn't built for you in mind, and it wasn't built for women, it wasn't built for the current care system that we're offering. And so it doesn't mean there isn't a path for you. And
Mhm.
so to sort of believe and trust and recognizing that most people's path does require some nonconformity and stepping outside of the paved path. And I think the other thing is it of course takes moving through fear. It of course takes courage. It of course takes creativity, of course takes support. I think many of us think we should just know how to do it and be brave enough and it won't be scary, and it always is.
Jessie, as always, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and insight. And thanks again for coming back on the show.
My pleasure.